The metal twisted like a screaming mouth around Victoria Sterling's unconscious body, flames licking hungrily at the Mercedes' crushed hood as gasoline pooled beneath the wreckage. Steam hissed from the radiator, glass glittered like deadly snow across the asphalt, and in the distance, sirens wailed, but they were still minutes away. Minutes Victoria Sterling didn't have. That's when Marcus Rivera, rushing home from his second job, with paint still under his fingernails, made a decision that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past, his daughter, and the woman whose empire cast shadows over half of Chicago. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the flames. And when Victoria's eyes fluttered open in those final seconds before the explosion, the 3 words she whispered would rewrite both their destinies forever. The collision happened at 11:47 p.m. on a rain-slicked intersection where Michigan Avenue meets the forgotten edge of the South Side, the exact border where Chicago's gleaming downtown towers give way to crumbling brick and chain-link fences. Marcus Rivera was driving his 15-year-old Honda Civic, windows down despite the October chill because the air conditioning had died 2 summers ago and he couldn't afford to fix it. His work clothes, paint-splattered jeans, and a faded construction company t-shirt clung to his tired frame as he navigated through the amber glow of streetlights, thinking about nothing except getting home to his 8-year-old daughter Sophie, who was probably already asleep on the couch, homework scattered around her like fallen leaves. The Mercedes S-Class came from nowhere, a silver blur cutting through the intersection at impossible speed, tires shrieking against wet pavement as the driver, whoever they were, lost control completely. Marcus saw it happening in slow motion, the luxury sedan spinning, the horrific crunch of metal against the concrete median, the sickening sound of glass exploding outward like a crystal symphony of destruction. The car flipped once, twice, then slammed into the traffic light pole with enough force to bend steel. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the hiss of steam and the settling groan of twisted metal. Then Marcus smelled it, gasoline sharp and deadly, pooling beneath the wreckage. His construction background kicked in immediately. He knew cars, knew accidents, knew that gasoline plus heat plus time equaled disaster. The Mercedes was already smoking, small flames beginning to dance around the engine block. Marcus threw his Honda into park right there in the middle of the street, hazard lights flashing, and sprinted toward the wreckage. "Hey!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside the driver's side window. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" Inside the crushed cabin, a woman hung upside down, held by her seatbelt, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Even through the spider-webbed glass and the chaos, Marcus could tell she was expensively dressed. Silk blouse, pearl earrings catching the streetlight, manicured nails on hands that had never known a day of manual labor. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that she was unconscious, trapped, and the smell of gasoline was getting stronger by the second. "Ma'am, I need you to wake up," Marcus called, using his elbow to clear away loose glass from the window frame. The metal was already warm to the touch, not a good sign. He managed to squeeze his upper body through the window opening, ignoring the jagged edges that tore at his shirt. "Come on, stay with me." The woman's eyelids fluttered. When they opened, Marcus found himself staring into the clearest gray eyes he'd ever seen, eyes that seemed to look straight through him, even in her disoriented state. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. "Don't try to talk," Marcus said, his hands already working to release her seatbelt. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm, okay? My name's Marcus. What's yours?" "Victoria," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing crackle of flames. "Victoria Sterling." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Victoria Sterling, the Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, the woman whose face graced the covers of business magazines, whose company owned half the office buildings downtown, the same Victoria Sterling whose construction contracts had kept Marcus employed for the past 3 years, though she'd never know his name or that he existed. But there was something else, something in the way she looked at him that made his chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't identify. Recognition. That was impossible. Women like Victoria Sterling didn't know men like Marcus Rivera existed. "Victoria, I need you to help me here," he said, forcing himself to focus as he struggled with the jammed seatbelt mechanism. The flames were spreading now, creeping closer to the passenger compartment. "Can you move your legs?" She tried, wincing with pain. I think my ankle is twisted, but I can move." "Good, that's good." Marcus's fingers finally found the release button on the seatbelt, but it was crushed and wouldn't budge. He pulled out his utility knife, the same one he used for work, and began carefully cutting through the webbing. "I'm going to pull you out now. It might hurt, but we don't have much time." That's when Victoria's hand found his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd just been in a car accident. Her gray eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made everything else, the flames, the danger, the sirens growing louder in the distance, fade into background noise. "Marcus," she whispered, and the way she said his name, like she'd been waiting years to say it, sent ice through his veins. Is Sophie safe?" The utility knife slipped from Marcus's suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the dashboard. The world tilted on its axis. Sophie. His daughter's name. This woman, this stranger, knew his daughter's name. "What did you just say?" he whispered, but the flames chose that moment to reach the interior of the car, and suddenly there was no time for questions. No time for anything except survival. Marcus grabbed Victoria around the waist and pulled her through the window opening with a strength born of pure adrenaline and terror. They tumbled onto the wet asphalt just as the first small explosion rocked the engine compartment, sending sparks and shrapnel flying through the air where they'd been moments before. He rolled them both away from the vehicle, his body shielding hers from the heat and debris. When they came to a stop against the concrete barrier, Victoria was conscious but dazed, her silk blouse torn, her perfect hair disheveled, her gray eyes still fixed on his face with that same impossible recognition. "How do you know my daughter?" Marcus demanded, his voice raw from smoke and shock. Around them, the night erupted into chaos. Fire trucks arriving, paramedics shouting orders, police cordoning off the street. But he couldn't hear any of it over the thundering of his own heartbeat. Victoria's lips moved, forming words so quiet he had to lean close to hear them over the roar of flames and sirens. "Because," she whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks, "I'm her mother." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The paramedics surrounded them before Marcus could process what Victoria had just said, before he could ask the 1,000 questions exploding in his mind like secondary fires. Professional hands lifted Victoria onto a stretcher, checked her vital signs, started an IV line with the efficient urgency of people who dealt with trauma every day. "Sir, are you injured?" A young EMT was shining a flashlight in Marcus's eyes, checking his pupils for signs of concussion. "Sir, can you hear me?" Marcus blinked, the world coming back into focus. His hands were shaking. When had they started shaking? And there was glass embedded in his forearms from crawling through the car window. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman they were loading into the ambulance, the woman who claimed to be Sophie's mother. Sophie's mother was dead, had been dead for 8 years since the day she'd walked out of their apartment and into traffic, leaving behind only a note that said she couldn't handle being a mother and an overdose that made the obituaries. Marcus had the death certificate. He'd been to the funeral. He'd held his 3-month-old daughter and promised her that he would be enough, that she would never need anyone else. "I need to go with her," Marcus said suddenly, stepping toward the ambulance. "That woman, she's—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence because it was impossible, because dead people didn't come back to life, because 8 years of single parenthood couldn't be built on a lie. "Are you family?" the EMT asked. Marcus looked at Victoria Sterling, CEO and billionaire, lying pale and broken on the stretcher with an oxygen mask over her face. Her gray eyes, the same gray as Sophie's eyes, he realized with a shock that made his knees weak, were still watching him with that devastating intensity. "I don't know," he said finally, because it was the only honest answer he had. The ride to Northwestern Memorial Hospital passed in a blur of sirens and medical jargon that Marcus didn't understand. He sat in the corner of the ambulance, giving the paramedics room to work, while his mind raced through 8 years of memories, looking for cracks in the story he'd told himself about Sophie's mother. Her name had been Lisa Chen, and she'd been 19 when Sophie was born, just 2 years younger than Marcus himself. They'd met at a community college party, dated for 6 months, and then she'd gotten pregnant. Marcus had proposed immediately, not because he loved her, but because it was the right thing to do, because his own father had walked out when Marcus was 12, and he'd sworn he'd never do the same thing. But Lisa had been different from the start. Distant. Distracted. She'd go through the motions of pregnancy, doctor's appointments, ultrasounds, buying baby clothes, but it was like she was sleepwalking through someone else's life. After Sophie was born, the postpartum depression had been severe. She wouldn't hold the baby, wouldn't feed her, spent most days staring out the window with empty eyes. Marcus had tried everything: therapy, medication, family support. Nothing worked. And then one Tuesday morning, he'd come home from his construction job to find the note on the kitchen table and the baby crying alone in her crib. The note had been short. "I can't do this. I'm not meant to be a mother. Take care of her. Don't look for me." He'd called the police, but Lisa Chen had vanished completely. No credit card transactions, no phone calls, no sightings. 3 days later, they'd found her body in the Chicago River, an apparent suicide. The funeral had been small. Just Marcus, his sister Elena, and a few people from the community college. He'd buried Lisa Chen and tried to move on. But what if he'd buried the wrong woman? What if the person who died in that river wasn't Sophie's mother at all? "Almost there," one of the paramedics said, as the ambulance turned into the hospital's emergency bay. "She's stabilized, but we'll need to run some tests for internal injuries." Marcus nodded, but he wasn't really listening. He was thinking about Sophie, asleep on the couch at home, trusting that he'd be back soon with some boring story about working late. How was he supposed to explain any of this to an 8-year-old? How was he supposed to explain it to himself? The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial was controlled. Chaos. Nurses moving with purposeful efficiency. Doctors consulting charts on tablets. Family members huddled in plastic chairs, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Marcus found himself relegated to the waiting area, while Victoria Sterling was whisked away for X-rays and CT scans and all the expensive medical tests that came with being rich and unconscious. He sat in an orange plastic chair that had been designed by someone who'd never had to wait for life-changing news, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria's face in those final moments before the explosion. The way she'd said Sophie's name like it was a prayer she'd been whispering for years. "Excuse me, are you the man who pulled Ms. Sterling from the accident?" Marcus looked up to find a woman in an expensive suit standing in front of him, her expression professional but concerned. She was probably in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of posture that suggested she was used to being in charge. "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "And you are?" "Jennifer Walsh, Ms. Sterling's assistant." She extended a hand, which Marcus shook automatically. "I came as soon as I heard. The doctors say she's going to be fine. No major injuries, just some cuts and bruises and a sprained ankle. You saved her life." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus replied, but Jennifer shook her head. "No, you didn't. Most people would have driven past, maybe called 911. You risked your own life to save a stranger. That's not something anyone would do. That's something a hero does." Hero. The word sat uncomfortably in Marcus's chest. Heroes were people in movies, people who wore capes and saved the world. He was just a construction worker who'd been in the right place at the right time. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "The woman, Ms. Sterling, she said something before we got her out of the car. She knew my daughter's name. How is that possible?" Jennifer's professional composure slipped for just a moment, and Marcus caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, guilt, fear. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. "Ms. Sterling was probably confused from the accident. Head injuries can cause—" "She wasn't confused," Marcus interrupted. "She was completely lucid. She looked right at me and asked if Sophie was safe. My daughter's name is Sophie. How would a stranger know that?" Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the floor. When she looked back up, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Rivera, Marcus Rivera." "Mr. Rivera, I think you should speak to Ms. Sterling directly when she's feeling better. There are some things, some conversations that need to happen, but they need to happen between the two of you." Before Marcus could press for more information, a doctor in green scrubs appeared at Jennifer's shoulder. "Are you here for Victoria Sterling?" the doctor asked. "She's awake and asking for Marcus Rivera." Marcus's stomach dropped. "That's me. She'd like to see you if you're up for it. She's in room 314. The elevator ride to the third floor felt like it lasted a lifetime. Marcus stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. Paint-stained clothes, day-old stubble, exhaustion written in every line of his face. What was he supposed to say to a woman who claimed to be his daughter's dead mother? What was he supposed to feel? Room 314 was private, spacious, with a view of the Chicago skyline that probably cost more per night than Marcus made in a week. Victoria Sterling was sitting up in bed, her head bandaged, her left ankle wrapped and elevated. Someone had brought her a clean hospital gown, but she still looked like what she was, a billionaire who'd just survived a car crash. "Marcus," she said when he stepped into the room, and again there was that quality in her voice, like she'd been waiting years to say his name. "Thank you for saving me." "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said, remaining by the door. "Not until you explain how you know my daughter." Victoria's hands twisted in the hospital blanket, and Marcus noticed that her knuckles were white with tension. "Sit down, please. This is going to be difficult for both of us." Marcus didn't sit. "Just tell me, are you saying you're Sophie's mother? Because that's impossible. Sophie's mother died 8 years ago. I was at her funeral." "You were at Lisa Chen's funeral," Victoria said quietly. "Lisa Chen, who was 6 months pregnant when she agreed to carry my child. Lisa Chen, who took $50,000 to disappear after Sophie was born, so that my baby could be raised by someone who would love her unconditionally." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He gripped the doorframe to keep himself upright as his world tilted and reformed around this new, impossible reality. "You're lying," he whispered, but even as he said it, he could see the truth in her gray eyes, Sophie's eyes. "I wish I was," Victoria said, tears spilling over. "I wish I was lying about all of it, about paying Lisa to disappear, about watching you from a distance for 8 years, about falling in love with my own daughter through surveillance reports and photographs, because I was too much of a coward to be her real mother. Marcus sank into the visitor's chair, his legs no longer capable of supporting him. Surveillance reports? I've never stopped watching, Victoria admitted. I know Sophie takes violin lessons at the community center on Saturdays. I know she's afraid of thunderstorms but loves the rain. I know she got an A on her science project about volcanoes last month. I know you work 2 jobs to pay for her violin lessons, even though you can barely afford groceries some weeks. Each detail was like a knife twist. Marcus thought about all the times he'd felt like someone was watching them, all the random scholarships and community grants that had appeared just when they needed them most. Sophie's violin teacher who'd waived half her fees because of a sudden endowment, the free dental care they'd received from a charity program that Marcus had never been able to track down. You, he breathed, all those times. That was you. Victoria nodded, more tears falling. I told myself I was helping, that I was doing what was best for her, but really I was just too selfish to let go and too cowardly to step forward. Why? Marcus's voice cracked on the word. Why did you give her away if you loved her? Victoria was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was 22 years old, and I'd just inherited a billion-dollar company when my father died. I was drowning, Marcus. Board meetings and hostile takeovers and lawyers who treated me like a child playing dress-up. I was working 18-hour days, sleeping in my office, living on coffee and anxiety medication. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And then I found out I was pregnant. The father? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. One night stand, Victoria said bluntly. A charity gala, too much wine, a stupid decision with a man whose name I don't even remember. When I found out about the baby, I knew I had 2 choices, have an abortion or find someone who could give her the life I couldn't. Marcus thought about those early days with Sophie, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the fierce love that had surprised him with its intensity. He'd been 21, barely making ends meet, terrified every single day that he was screwing up, but he'd never doubted that he wanted to be her father. So you hired Lisa Chen, he said. I hired Lisa to carry the baby and to find suitable adoptive parents, Victoria corrected. The plan was never for you to be involved. Lisa was supposed to give birth, hand over the baby to a nice suburban couple, and disappear with her money. But then what? Victoria's smile was small and sad. But then she met you, and she fell in love with the idea of giving her baby a father who would actually love her. Lisa called me 3 days before Sophie was born and told me she'd found someone better than any family I could have chosen. Someone who would love Sophie not because it was his job, but because it was his choice. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the hospital, footsteps in the hallway, the soft ping of elevator doors, the murmur of voices at the nurses' station. Marcus stared at Victoria Sterling, this stranger who was somehow the mother of his child, and tried to process 8 years of lies and half-truths, and love built on a foundation he'd never known existed. She's happy, he said finally, because it was the only thing that mattered. Sophie is happy. She's smart and funny and kind, and she plays violin like an angel. She doesn't need anything else. I know, Victoria whispered. That's why I stayed away. That's why I've been watching from the shadows instead of disrupting the beautiful life you've given her. But Marcus, she looked at him with eyes full of years of suppressed longing. I'm dying. The words hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his world for the second time in an hour. What? Pancreatic cancer, Victoria said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd had time to accept the unacceptable. Stage 4. I've got maybe 6 months, probably less. The doctors have been very clear about that. Marcus stared at her, this woman who looked so much like his daughter, who shared Sophie's gray eyes and stubborn chin. How long have you known? 3 months, Victoria replied. 3 months of telling myself that Sophie was better off without me, that I should just disappear quietly and let you both continue your lives. But then tonight happened, and you saved me, and I realized I can't die without her knowing the truth, without her knowing that she was loved and wanted, even if I wasn't brave enough to keep her. She doesn't know anything, Marcus said. She thinks her mother died when she was a baby. She thinks I'm her only parent. I know, and I'm not asking to replace you. I'm not asking to be her mother. You've earned that right 1,000 times over. I'm just asking for the chance to know her before I die, to tell her that I loved her enough to give her the father she deserved, to tell her that watching her grow up from a distance has been the greatest joy of my life. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to imagine how to explain any of this to Sophie. How do you tell an 8-year-old that everything she thinks she knows about her life is built on a beautiful lie? How do you introduce her to a mother who gave her away, but never stopped loving her? I need time to think, he said. Of course, Victoria said immediately. Take all the time you need. I needed you to know. After what you did tonight, saving my life, you deserve the truth. Marcus stood up, his legs still unsteady. At the door, he turned back one more time. Why tonight? He asked. Why tell me now? Victoria's smile was heartbreaking in its sadness. Because when I saw you running toward that burning car, when I realized that the man risking his life to save me was the man I'd been watching raise my daughter for 8 years, I understood something I'd been too afraid to see before. What's that? That love isn't about genetics or blood or biology, Victoria said softly. Love is about showing up. And Marcus, you've been showing up for Sophie every single day of her life. That makes you more her parent than I could ever be. Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. He left Victoria Sterling alone in her hospital room with her secrets and her regrets, and walked out into the Chicago night to figure out how to tell his daughter that her mother had risen from the dead. The drive home took him through the same intersection where the accident had happened just hours earlier. The wreckage had been cleared away, the traffic lights repaired, the broken glass swept up. If you didn't know what had happened there, you'd never guess that 2 lives had collided and changed forever in this ordinary place. But Marcus would never be able to drive past this corner again without remembering the moment his world shifted on its axis, without seeing Victoria Sterling's gray eyes, Sophie's eyes, looking at him with 8 years of love and regret and desperate hope. At home, Sophie was still asleep on the couch, her violin case leaning against the wall, her homework spread across the coffee table in the careful chaos that only an 8-year-old could create. She looked so much like Victoria that Marcus couldn't believe he'd never noticed it before. The same stubborn chin, the same long eyelashes, the same way of frowning slightly in her sleep, as if she was solving complex problems in her dreams. Marcus covered her with a blanket and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Tomorrow he would have to figure out how to tell her that her life was about to change in ways neither of them could imagine. Tomorrow he would have to decide whether to let a dying billionaire into their small, careful world. But tonight he just sat in the darkness and watched his daughter sleep, and tried to memorize this moment before everything they knew about their family became something else entirely. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his small kitchen table, nursing cup after cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at his phone and trying to figure out what to do next. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the living room where Sophie slept peacefully, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just been turned upside down. By 6 a.m., when the first pale light began filtering through the apartment's thin curtains, Marcus had made a decision. He needed to know more before he said anything to Sophie. He needed to understand exactly who Victoria Sterling was, what kind of woman could give away a baby and then spend 8 years watching from the shadows. Sophie stirred on the couch as the morning light reached her face, stretching and yawning with the unconscious grace that only children possessed. Her hair was a mess of tangles, and there was a small crease on her cheek from sleeping on the couch cushion. "Morning, Dad," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Marcus said, which was true enough. "How about pancakes for breakfast?" Sophie's face lit up. Pancakes were a weekend treat, not a Wednesday morning surprise. "Really? What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion to make pancakes for my favorite daughter?" "I'm your only daughter," Sophie pointed out with 8-year-old logic, but she was already padding toward the bathroom to brush her teeth. While Sophie got ready for school, Marcus made pancakes from a box mix and tried to act normal, but his hands shook slightly as he flipped them, and he kept glancing at his daughter's face, looking for traces of Victoria Sterling that he'd somehow missed for 8 years. They were there, he realized with a start, in the way Sophie tilted her head when she was thinking, in the determined set of her jaw when she concentrated on cutting her pancakes into perfect squares, in the way her gray eyes seemed to look right through you when she was trying to figure something out. How had he never noticed? How had he convinced himself that Sophie looked like his side of the family when she was clearly the miniature image of a woman he'd never known existed? "Dad, you're staring," Sophie said, syrup dripping from her fork. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Marcus lied smoothly. "Just thinking about work stuff." After he dropped Sophie at school, Lincoln Elementary, where she was in 3rd grade and already reading at a 5th grade level, Marcus drove across town to Sterling Dynamics headquarters. The building was a sleek glass tower that stretched 42 stories into the Chicago sky, the kind of place where men in $1,000 suits made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Marcus had actually worked on this building 3 years ago, part of the crew that had installed the marble in the lobby. He remembered thinking at the time that he'd never be able to afford to work in a place like this, let alone own it. Now he was walking through the front doors to confront the woman who owned the entire building. The security guard at the front desk looked him up and down with poorly concealed disdain. Marcus was wearing his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt, but he still looked exactly like what he was, a working-class man in a billionaire's world. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, his tone suggesting that Marcus was probably lost. "I'm here to see Victoria Sterling," Marcus said. "My name is Marcus Rivera." The guard's eyebrows rose. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but she'll want to see me. Call Jennifer Walsh, her assistant. Tell her it's about last night." The guard made the call with obvious skepticism, but his attitude changed completely when he hung up the phone. "Ms. Walsh will be right down to escort you up," he said, suddenly much more polite. "Please have a seat." The lobby was all gleaming marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Marcus sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and tried not to feel intimidated. He'd saved Victoria Sterling's life. That had to count for something. Jennifer Walsh appeared 5 minutes later, looking harried and concerned. She was wearing another expensive suit, this one navy blue, and her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her facial features. "Mr. Rivera," she said, extending her hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to Victoria," Marcus said simply. "About Sophie, about the truth." Jennifer's professional composure flickered again, just like it had the night before. "Ms. Sterling is resting at home today on doctor's orders. Perhaps we could schedule something for next week." "Jennifer." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. "I know, she told me last night. Sophie is her daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Jennifer glanced around the busy lobby, then made a decision. "Come with me," she said. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent, but Marcus could practically feel Jennifer's anxiety radiating off her in waves. When the doors opened, they stepped into a reception area that was almost as impressive as the lobby. More marble, more modern art, and a view of Lake Michigan that stretched to the horizon. "Ms. Sterling isn't here," Jennifer said as she led him through a maze of corridors lined with awards and photographs. "She's at her penthouse recovering from the accident, but there's someone else you should meet first." She stopped in front of a door marked Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Chief Medical Officer, and knocked twice before entering. Behind a massive desk sat a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Chen, this is Marcus Rivera," Jennifer said. "Sophie's father." Dr. Chen's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly and stood to shake Marcus's hand. "Mr. Rivera, I've heard so much about you." "From Victoria?" "From medical reports," Dr. Chen said carefully. "Please sit down. Jennifer told me you know about Sophie's parentage now." Marcus settled into another expensive chair, his head spinning. "Are you related to Lisa Chen?" "Lisa was my daughter," Dr. Chen said simply, and Marcus felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. "Your daughter," he repeated, "the woman who carried Sophie." "The woman who died because I asked her to," Dr. Chen said, her voice heavy with old grief. "Lisa wasn't supposed to die, Mr. Rivera. She was supposed to take the money and disappear, maybe move to California or Florida, start a new life. The overdose, that wasn't part of the plan." Marcus stared at her, trying to process this new information. "You're saying Lisa's death was an accident?" "Lisa had a history of depression," Dr. Chen explained. "She'd been clean for 2 years when Victoria hired her, but pregnancy can trigger relapses. After she gave birth to Sophie, after she met you and realized what she'd done, giving away a baby she'd carried for 9 months, it broke something inside her." "So she really is dead," Marcus said, and he was surprised by the relief in his own voice. "Very much so. I was the one who identified her body." Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "I was also the one who convinced Victoria to hire Lisa in the first place. I thought it would be simple, a business transaction that would help everyone involved. I never imagined it would lead to my daughter's death." "Is that why you work for Victoria now?" Marcus asked. "Partly," Dr. Chen admitted, "but also because I wanted to be close to Sophie, even if I could never know her. Victoria has shared every report, every photograph, every milestone. In a strange way, watching Sophie grow up has been my way of honoring Lisa's memory." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of Chicago traffic 40 floors below. Marcus tried to imagine the chain of events that had led to this moment. A young woman desperate for money, a billionaire desperate to give away her child, a grieving mother trying to make sense of her daughter's death. "I want to see Victoria," Marcus said finally. "Today, I have questions, and I think Sophie deserves answers." Dr. Chen and Jennifer exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't read. "There's something else you should know first," Jennifer said carefully, "about Victoria's condition." "She told me about the cancer," Marcus said. "Pancreatic, 6 months to live." It's closer to 3 months now, Dr. Chen said gently. Maybe less. The accident last night. Her body isn't handling stress well. She's been putting off treatment to stay functional as long as possible, but time is running out. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 3 months. Sophie would barely have time to know her biological mother before losing her all over again. Does she know? He asked. About the timeline? She knows, Jennifer confirmed. That's why she's been pushing so hard to finish the transition plan for the company. She wants everything settled before she dies, Marcus finished. Another silence stretched between them. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan sparkled in the afternoon sun, and Marcus found himself thinking about Sophie's swimming lessons at the community center, how she loved the water but was still afraid to put her head under. "I'll call her," Jennifer said finally. "Tell her you're coming." Victoria Sterling's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building on Lakeshore Drive that Marcus had probably walked past 1,000 times without ever imagining who lived inside. The elevator that carried him up from the parking garage was so smooth and quiet that he barely felt it moving. When the doors opened directly into Victoria's living room, Marcus stepped into a space that was both magnificent and sterile. All glass and steel and modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the lake and the city skyline, but somehow the effect was more isolating than impressive. Victoria was sitting on a white leather sofa, her left ankle propped up on a matching ottoman. She'd changed out of the hospital gown into simple black pants and a gray sweater that almost perfectly matched her eyes. Without the chaos of the accident and the harsh lighting of the hospital, Marcus could see just how much she looked like Sophie, and just how fragile she appeared. "You came," she said, and there was surprise in her voice, as if she'd expected him to run away and never look back. "I said I needed time to think," Marcus replied, remaining by the elevator. "I've been thinking. And? I have questions, a lot of them." Victoria nodded and gestured to the chair across from her. This time, Marcus sat down. "Ask me anything," she said. "Dr. Chen says you've been watching Sophie for 8 years. What exactly does that mean?" Victoria picked up a tablet from the coffee table and handed it to him. On the screen was a photo of Sophie from just last week, laughing as she fed ducks at the pond in their neighborhood park. "I have a private investigator who sends me reports," Victoria said quietly. "Photos, videos sometimes. Information about her school performance, her health, her interests. I know she's afraid of spiders but loves thunderstorms. I know she wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. I know she still sleeps with the stuffed elephant you bought her for her 3rd birthday." Marcus scrolled through the tablet, his stomach churning as he realized the scope of the surveillance. There were hundreds of photos. Sophie at school, at the park, walking home with him, practicing violin in their apartment. Their entire life had been documented by a stranger with a telephoto lens. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "You've been stalking my daughter." "I've been loving my daughter," Victoria replied, but there was shame in her voice. "I know how it looks, Marcus. I know it's not normal or healthy, but it was the only way I could be part of her life without disrupting yours." "You don't think paying for her violin lessons disrupted our life? You don't think all those mysterious scholarships and grants didn't affect us?" Victoria flinched. "I was trying to help." "You were trying to control," Marcus shot back. "You gave her away, but you couldn't let go. You wanted all the benefits of being her mother without any of the actual work." The words were harsh, but they needed to be said. Victoria had spent 8 years playing puppet master with their lives, and Marcus was tired of dancing to strings he hadn't known existed. "You're right," Victoria said simply. "You're absolutely right. I've been selfish and controlling and probably more than a little obsessive. But Marcus, I need you to understand something." She leaned forward, her gray eyes intense with the same focus Sophie got when she was trying to explain something important. "I didn't give Sophie away because I didn't want her," Victoria continued. "I gave her away because I was 22 years old and drowning. My father had just died, and I'd inherited a company with 12,000 employees and shareholders who wanted to see me fail. I was working 20-hour days and living on anxiety medication and about 3 hours of sleep. I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone a baby." "So you hired Lisa Chen," Marcus said. "I hired Lisa Chen because my lawyers told me it was the cleanest way to handle an unwanted pregnancy," Victoria replied. "But the baby was never unwanted, Marcus. She was just impossible. I couldn't figure out how to be a mother and a CEO at the same time. I thought I had to choose." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception but finding only exhaustion and regret. "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm dying," Victoria said bluntly. "Now I understand that I made the wrong choice. I should have stepped back from the company. I should have hired help. I should have figured out how to be both things instead of choosing neither." "But you didn't," Marcus pointed out. "You chose the company." "I chose what I thought was best for everyone," Victoria corrected, "including Sophie. And for 8 years, I've watched her grow up happy and loved and secure. And I've told myself I made the right choice. You've been an incredible father, Marcus. Better than I could have been as a mother." The compliment should have felt good, but instead it just made Marcus angry. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't try to make this okay by praising me. You don't get to give away your child and then take credit for how well she turned out." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You're right again. I'm sorry." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 8 years of secrets and lies and half-truths settling between them like dust. Through the enormous windows, Marcus could see boats dotting the lake, tiny white specks against the blue water. "I want to know about the money," he said finally. "All of it. Every scholarship, every grant, every mysterious check. I want a full accounting." "Of course," Victoria said immediately. "Jennifer has all the records. It's about $80,000 over 8 years. Violin lessons, dental care, that emergency room visit when Sophie broke her arm, some grocery store gift cards when you were between jobs." $80,000. Marcus felt sick. That was more than he made in 2 years, and he'd never known it was coming from Sophie's biological mother. "I'll pay it back," he said. "Marcus, no, I'll pay it back," he repeated firmly. "Every penny. I don't want your charity." "It was never charity," Victoria said softly. "It was child support. It was a mother trying to provide for her daughter the only way she knew how." "You're not her mother," Marcus snapped, and immediately regretted the harshness of his words when he saw Victoria flinch. "No," she agreed quietly. "You're right. I'm not her mother. I'm just the woman who gave birth to her, and then spent 8 years regretting that I wasn't brave enough to keep her." Something in her voice, the absolute defeat, the self-loathing made Marcus's anger soften slightly. Victoria Sterling might be a billionaire, but she was also a woman facing death with the knowledge that she'd missed her chance at the one thing that might have mattered more than money. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Why not just die quietly and let us never know the truth?" Victoria was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on something beyond the windows. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because last night, when you pulled me out of that car, when you risked your life for a complete stranger, I realized something I should have understood 8 years ago." "What's that?" "That courage isn't about being fearless," she said, looking directly at him. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You were terrified last night, I could see it in your eyes, but you ran toward the fire instead of away from it. You saved my life without knowing who I was or what I could do for you in return. Marcus thought about those moments in the burning car, the split-second decision to pull Victoria to safety. He hadn't thought about it as courage. He'd just done what needed to be done. "So," he said. "So I realized that I've spent 8 years being a coward," Victoria continued. "I've been too afraid to face you, too afraid to disrupt Sophie's life, too afraid to deal with the consequences of the choice I made. But watching you last night, seeing what real courage looks like, I understood that I can't die without at least trying to be brave, even if it's too late." The room fell silent again, except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the vast space. Marcus found himself thinking about Sophie, probably in math class right now, solving problems and raising her hand and living her normal, beautiful life, without any idea that everything was about to change. "I don't know how to tell her," he said finally. "We don't have to tell her anything," Victoria replied quickly. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I was hoping maybe I could just meet her, as a family friend, maybe, someone you work with. I don't need her to know who I am. I just need to know her." Marcus considered this. It would be easier, certainly, less traumatic for Sophie, less complicated for everyone involved. But it also felt like another lie in a story that had already been built on too many deceptions. "She deserves the truth," he said. "Maybe not all of it at once, but she deserves to know that her mother didn't die in an accident. She deserves to know that she was loved enough to be given to someone who could take better care of her." Victoria's eyes widened. "You'd really tell her about me?" "I'd tell her about us," Marcus corrected. "About how sometimes families come together in unexpected ways. About how love doesn't always look like what we think it should look like." For the first time since he'd met her, Victoria Sterling smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face and made her look years younger. In that moment, Marcus could see exactly what Sophie would look like as a grown woman. "When?" Victoria asked. "This weekend," Marcus decided. "Saturday. We usually go to the park on Saturday mornings. You could accidentally run into us. We'll take it from there." "Thank you," Victoria whispered, and Marcus could hear 8 years of longing in those 2 words. He stood up to leave, then paused by the elevator doors. "Victoria?" "Yes?" "Sophie's a good kid," he said. "She's kind and funny and smart, and she has a big heart. But she's also 8 years old, and 8-year-olds don't always understand complicated adult emotions. If you hurt her, if you disappoint her or let her down, I will make sure you never see her again. Do you understand?" Victoria nodded solemnly. "I understand." "Good," Marcus said, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Victoria Sterling sitting alone in her empty penthouse, staring out at a city she owned but had never really been part of. For the first time, Marcus felt something like sympathy for her. All the money in the world couldn't buy back the 8 years she'd lost, couldn't cure the cancer that was killing her, couldn't erase the knowledge that she'd chosen wrong when it mattered most. But maybe if they were all very careful and very lucky, the next 3 months could be different. Maybe it wasn't too late for Sophie to have a mother, even if it was only for a little while. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The drive home took Marcus through neighborhoods he'd known his entire life, the same streets where he'd grown up, where his parents still lived, where Sophie was learning to ride her bike and make friends and believe in a future that was full of possibilities. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but Marcus felt like he was seeing it all through different eyes. At a red light, he called his sister Elena from his cell phone. "Hey, little brother," Elena answered on the second ring. "What's up?" "I need to ask you something," Marcus said. "About Sophie's mother, about Lisa Chen." There was a pause on Elena's end. "Marcus, why are you bringing this up now? Sophie's fine. You're fine. Why go digging up old pain?" "Because the pain isn't as old as I thought," Marcus said. "Elena, what if I told you that Lisa Chen wasn't Sophie's biological mother?" "I'd say you've been working too many double shifts and you need to get some sleep," Elena replied, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Just answer the question. Looking back, do you remember anything strange about Lisa's pregnancy? Anything that didn't quite add up?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you asking me this?" "Please, Elena, it's important." Another pause. Longer this time. "There was one thing," Elena said finally. "When Lisa was about 7 months pregnant, she came to dinner at Mom and Dad's house. Remember? You had to work late, so she came by herself." Marcus vaguely remembered the evening Elena was talking about. It had been during his first year of full-time construction work, when overtime was the difference between making rent and getting evicted. "What happened?" he asked. "She was talking about the baby," Elena continued, "about what kind of mother she wanted to be, what she hoped Sophie would be like when she grew up. Normal pregnant woman stuff. But then Dad asked her about her family medical history, for the pediatrician, and she just froze." "Froze how?" "She couldn't answer any of his questions. She didn't know if diabetes or heart disease or cancer ran in her family. She said her parents died when she was young and she'd been in foster care. But Marcus, she couldn't even remember what her parents looked like." The light turned green and Marcus drove automatically while his mind processed this new information. "What did you think at the time?" "I thought trauma could do that," Elena said. "I thought maybe losing her parents had been so terrible that she'd blocked out the memories, but now that you're asking, it was strange. Most people remember something about their childhood, even if it's painful." "Anything else?" "Just little things. She didn't know any lullabies. She'd never been to a baby shower before and didn't understand any of the games. She asked me really basic questions about pregnancy that most women would know from friends or family. It was like she'd never been around babies or pregnant women before in her life." Marcus pulled into his apartment complex's parking lot, but didn't get out of the car. Everything Elena was describing fit with what Victoria had told him, that Lisa Chen had been hired to carry someone else's baby, that she'd been paid to play a role she'd never prepared for. "Why are you asking about this now?" Elena repeated. "Marcus, you're scaring me." "I met someone," Marcus said carefully, "someone who knew Lisa during her pregnancy, someone who told me things about Sophie's birth that I never knew before." "What kind of things?" Marcus closed his eyes, trying to find words for a truth that seemed impossible even to him. "Elena, what if Sophie's biological mother is still alive? What if she's been watching Sophie grow up all these years? What if she wanted to meet her?" The silence on Elena's end stretched so long that Marcus thought the call had been dropped. "Elena, are you there?" "I'm here," she said finally, her voice tight with concern. "Marcus, honey, I think you need to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. Grief can play tricks on your mind, and losing a parent is traumatic even when—" "I'm not having a breakdown," Marcus interrupted. "I know how this sounds, but Elena, I need you to trust me. Can you watch Sophie on Saturday afternoon? I might need to handle some things." "Of course I can watch her," Elena said immediately. "But Marcus, promise me you'll be careful. Sophie's been through enough loss in her life. She doesn't need false hope about her mother coming back from the dead." "I promise," Marcus said, and hung up before Elena could ask any more questions he wasn't ready to answer. That evening, Marcus made Sophie's favorite dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, and tried to act normal while his mind raced through possible scenarios for Saturday's meeting. How do you introduce an 8-year-old to her dying biological mother without traumatizing her? How do you explain 8 years of secrecy without destroying her trust? "Dad, you're being weird again," Sophie said, dipping her sandwich into her soup with the serious concentration she brought to everything she did. "Weird how?" "You keep staring at me like you're trying to memorize my face," she said. "And you've asked me 3 times if I like my sandwich. It's grilled cheese. I always like grilled cheese." Marcus forced himself to smile. "Sorry, kiddo, just tired." Sophie studied him with those gray eyes, Victoria's eyes, and Marcus wondered how many other similarities he'd missed over the years. "Are you sad about something?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed. The question caught Marcus off guard. Sophie was perceptive, but she rarely asked about his emotional state directly. Usually she just climbed into his lap when he seemed upset and stayed there until he felt better. "Not sad exactly," he said carefully. "Just thinking about some big changes that might be coming." "What kind of changes?" Marcus set down his soup spoon and looked at his daughter. Really looked at her, trying to see her through Victoria's eyes. What would it feel like to watch this child grow up from a distance, to love her desperately but never be able to hold her, or comfort her, or read her bedtime stories? "Sophie," he said finally, "what would you say if I told you that there might be someone who wants to meet you? Someone who knew your mom before you were born?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Someone who knew my mom?" "Maybe," Marcus said. "It's complicated, and I'm not sure yet if it's going to happen, but if it did, how would you feel about that?" Sophie was quiet for a long time, chewing thoughtfully on her sandwich. "Would they tell me things about her? Like what she was like?" "They might," Marcus said. "Then I'd want to meet them," Sophie said simply. "I don't remember my mom at all. Sometimes I pretend I do, but I know I'm just making it up. If someone could tell me real things about her, that would be good." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "What kinds of things would you want to know?" "Did she like music? Did she want me to learn violin? Was she pretty? Was she nice?" Sophie's questions tumbled out one after another, each one a small knife in Marcus's chest as he realized how much his daughter had wondered about the mother she'd never known. "Those are good questions," he said. "If we do meet this person, you can ask them all of that." "When would we meet them?" "Maybe this weekend," Marcus said, "if you want to." Sophie nodded seriously. "I want to." That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and tried to prepare for the most important conversation of his life. He made lists of things Sophie should know, things she shouldn't know yet, ways to explain the inexplicable without lying or overwhelming her 8-year-old mind. But mostly, he stared at his phone and wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. Victoria Sterling was dying. In 3 months, Sophie would lose her biological mother all over again. Was it cruel to give her that connection only to take it away? Was it fair to burden an 8-year-old with the knowledge that her mother had chosen money over family? At midnight, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Victoria. Jennifer gave me your number. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about Saturday, about meeting Sophie. I'm terrified I'll say the wrong thing or disappoint her or make everything worse. Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it." Marcus stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "She's excited to meet someone who knew her mother. Don't let her down." The response came quickly. "I won't, I promise." Marcus turned off his phone and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. In 3 days, everything would change. In 3 days, Sophie would learn that her mother had loved her enough to give her away, but not enough to keep her. In 3 days, the careful life Marcus had built for his daughter would either become richer and more complete, or it would shatter into pieces he might never be able to put back together. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria Sterling sitting alone in her empty penthouse, dying slowly while the daughter she'd given away grew up beautiful and loved and unaware of her existence. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe some truths were worth the pain they caused. Maybe love, even complicated and imperfect love, was always better than emptiness. Saturday would tell them which was true. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Chicago feel alive with possibility. Marcus had barely slept, but Sophie bounced out of bed with the energy that only 8-year-olds possessed, chattering excitedly about their planned trip to Lincoln Park. "Are we really going to meet someone who knew Mom?" she asked for the 5th time as Marcus helped her into her favorite purple jacket, the one with the butterfly patches she'd insisted on sewing herself. "Maybe," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Remember what I told you? This person might have some stories to share, but we need to be patient and polite, okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly, but her gray eyes sparkled with anticipation. She'd been asking questions about her mother all week, what Lisa had looked like, what her favorite foods were, whether she'd been good at drawing like Sophie was. Marcus had answered what he could and deflected the rest, all while his stomach churned with the knowledge that every answer was built on a lie. The park was busy for a Saturday morning, filled with families walking dogs, couples jogging along the lakefront path, and children playing on the sprawling playground equipment. Marcus and Sophie found their usual spot on a bench near the duck pond, where Sophie liked to bring breadcrumbs and practice the Spanish vocabulary words she was learning in school. "Pato," she said seriously, pointing at a mallard. "That means duck." "Very good," Marcus replied, but his attention was divided between his daughter's impromptu language lesson and scanning the park for any sign of Victoria Sterling. She was supposed to accidentally encounter them around 10:30. It was now 10:25, and Marcus's nerves were stretched to their breaking point. Then he saw her. Victoria was walking slowly along the path that circled the pond, dressed in simple jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger and less intimidating than she had in her penthouse. She was using a walking stick, probably because of her injured ankle, and moving carefully, as if she were afraid of disturbing the perfect autumn morning. When she spotted Marcus and Sophie on their bench, she paused, and for a moment Marcus thought she might turn around and leave. The fear in her eyes was visible even from a distance, the terror of a woman about to meet the daughter she'd given away 8 years ago. But then Sophie waved, because Sophie waved at everyone, from strangers on the bus to dogs being walked past their apartment, and Victoria's face transformed with a smile so radiant that Marcus had to look away. Victoria approached their bench slowly, her walking stick tapping against the paved path. "Excuse me," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "but are you feeding the ducks? I've been looking everywhere for someone who might know what they like to eat." It was a clumsy opening, but Sophie immediately perked up. "We brought breadcrumbs," she announced, "but Dad says we're not supposed to give them too much because it's not good for their tummies." "Your dad sounds very smart," Victoria said, glancing at Marcus with an expression of barely contained emotion. "This is my dad, Marcus," Sophie said with 8-year-old confidence. "I'm Sophie. What's your name?" "Victoria," she replied, and Marcus could hear years of longing in the way she said it, as if she'd been practicing this moment in her mind for 8 years. "It's very nice to meet you, Sophie." "Do you want to sit with us?" Sophie asked, scooting over to make room on the bench. "We always sit here because you can see all the ducks and Sometimes there are baby ones in the spring. Victoria looked at Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She settled carefully onto the bench between Marcus and Sophie, and for a moment the three of them sat in silence, watching the ducks paddle across the pond in the morning sunlight. "You have beautiful hair," Victoria said suddenly, and Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "The color is very pretty." "Dad says I get it from my mom," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She died when I was a baby, so I don't remember her, but Dad says she was beautiful." Victoria's breath caught audibly. "I'm sure she was," she whispered. "Did you know her?" Sophie asked with the directness that had caught Marcus off guard so many times over the years. "Dad said maybe you knew someone who knew my mom." Victoria glanced at Marcus again, and he could see the question in her eyes. How much can I say? How much truth can she handle? "I knew her a little bit," Victoria said carefully. "Not very well, but I knew her." "What was she like?" Sophie asked eagerly. "Was she nice? Was she funny? Did she like music?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "She was very young, and she was scared. But she loved you very much, Sophie. Even before you were born, she talked about you all the time." "She did?" "She did. She used to say that she hoped you would grow up to be kind and smart and happy. She wanted you to learn music, and she hoped you would love books and art and beautiful things." Sophie's face lit up. "I do love those things. I play violin, and I like to draw, and Dad reads to me every night. Do you think she would be proud of me?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, and Marcus watched Victoria's face crumble and rebuild itself in the space of a heartbeat. "I think," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks, "that she would be so proud of you she wouldn't be able to find words big enough to describe it." They spent an hour together on that bench, with Sophie chattering about school and violin lessons and her latest art project, while Victoria listened with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every word. Marcus found himself watching the interactions between them, looking for signs of recognition or instinctive connection, but mostly he just saw an 8-year-old girl enjoying the attention of a kind adult who asked good questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When it was time to go, Sophie had a playdate with her friend Emma at 2 o'clock. Victoria stood up reluctantly. "It was wonderful meeting you, Sophie," she said formally. "Thank you for telling me about the ducks." "Will I see you again?" Sophie asked, and Marcus could hear the hope in her voice. Victoria looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. "I hope so," she said, "if that's okay with your dad." "It's okay with me," Sophie announced. "You're nice, and you knew my mom." After Sophie ran ahead to chase a butterfly that had caught her attention, Victoria grabbed Marcus's arm. "She's perfect," she whispered fiercely. "She's absolutely perfect. Thank you for letting me meet her." "This was just the beginning," Marcus said quietly. "If you want to be part of her life, you need to be prepared for the long term. Sophie gets attached to people. If you disappear on her—" "I won't," Victoria said quickly. "I mean, I can't promise I won't die, but I won't disappear. Not voluntarily, not ever again." Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria Sterling became a regular part of their Saturday morning routine. She would happen to be in the park when Marcus and Sophie arrived, and they would spend an hour or two together feeding ducks, walking the trails, or sitting on their bench while Sophie practiced reading aloud from the books she checked out of the library. Victoria was careful never to overstep, never to act like anything more than a family friend who had known Sophie's mother. But Marcus could see the hunger in her eyes every time she looked at Sophie, the desperate need to touch her daughter's hair, or hold her hand, or claim her in some visible way. Sophie, for her part, seemed to bloom under Victoria's attention. She started asking Marcus if they could invite Victoria from the park to dinner, or if Victoria might want to come to her violin recital next month. It was clear that she was growing attached, and Marcus found himself torn between happiness that his daughter was forming a new relationship and terror about what would happen when Victoria's cancer finally claimed her. The crisis came on a rainy Thursday evening in early November. Marcus was making dinner when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and his blood went cold. "Mr. Rivera, this is Dr. Martinez from the emergency department. We have Victoria Sterling here, and your name is listed as her emergency contact. Can you come in right away?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Emergency contact. When had he become Victoria's emergency contact? "What happened?" he asked, already grabbing his keys. "She collapsed at her office this afternoon. We're running tests now, but you should come in as soon as possible." Marcus called Elena to come watch Sophie, making up some excuse about a work emergency, then drove to the hospital through traffic that seemed designed to test his patience. By the time he reached Victoria's room, she was awake, but pale, connected to monitors and an IV drip that made her look fragile in a way that terrified him. "You came," she said weakly, and Marcus was struck by how small she looked in the hospital bed. "Of course I came. What happened?" "The cancer," Victoria said simply. "It's moving faster than the doctors expected. They want to start aggressive treatment, but—" She trailed off, staring at the ceiling tiles. "But what?" "But aggressive treatment means weeks in the hospital, months of being too sick to function. I might get an extra few months of life, but they wouldn't be good months. And Sophie," her voice broke, "I've only just met her. I can't spend what time I have left being sick and weak and useless." Marcus sank into the visitor's chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "What are the doctors recommending?" "They're recommending treatment," Victoria said. "But they're also being realistic. Even with chemotherapy, even with everything they can throw at it, I probably have 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. And without treatment, 2 months, maybe less." Victoria turned her head to look at him, and her gray eyes were fierce with determination. "But those 2 months would be mine. I could spend them with Sophie. I could be present and conscious and able to enjoy whatever time we have left." Marcus understood what she was asking without her having to say it directly. She wanted to tell Sophie the truth. She wanted to spend her final weeks as Sophie's mother instead of as a stranger who had known her biological mother. "She'll be devastated when you die," Marcus said bluntly. "She'll be devastated either way," Victoria replied. "At least this way she'll know she was loved. At least this way she'll have some real memories instead of just stories." "And you think that's fair? To give her a mother just to take her away again?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "that love is always fair, even when it hurts, even when it ends too soon." Marcus left the hospital with no clear answers and a decision that felt impossible to make. On one hand, Sophie deserved to know her biological mother, deserved to understand where she came from and why she looked the way she did. On the other hand, she was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds shouldn't have to deal with death and loss, and the complicated emotions that came with discovering that their entire life had been built on a well-intentioned lie. When he got home, Sophie was already asleep on the couch, with a book in her lap. Some story about a girl who discovered she was secretly a princess. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Elena looked up from where she was folding laundry at the kitchen table. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus sat down across from his sister and tried to find words for a truth that seemed too large for his small apartment kitchen. "Elena," he said finally, "what would you do if you found out that Sophie's biological mother was still alive and that she was dying?" Elena's hands stilled on the towel she was folding. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" So he told her everything, the accident, the revelation, the weeks of secret meetings in the park, Victoria's cancer diagnosis, and the impossible choice that now lay before him. Elena listened without interruption, her expression shifting from disbelief to shock to something that might have been understanding. "Jesus, Marcus," she breathed when he finished. "This woman has been watching Sophie her entire life?" "From a distance," Marcus said. "But yes. And now she wants to tell Sophie who she really is? She wants to spend whatever time she has left being Sophie's mother instead of just a stranger who happened to know her biological mother." Elena was quiet for a long time, absently folding and refolding the same towel. "What does Sophie want?" she asked finally. "Sophie doesn't know enough to want anything," Marcus said. "She thinks Victoria is just someone who knew her mother. She doesn't know that Victoria is her mother. But if she did know, if you told her the truth, what do you think she would want?" Marcus thought about Sophie's endless questions about her mother, her hunger for any detail about the woman who had given birth to her. He thought about the way her face lit up when Victoria told stories about what her mother had wanted for her future. "She'd want to know her," he admitted. "Sophie's always wanted a mother. She's never said it directly, but I can see it in the way she watches other kids with their moms at school pickup, or how she gets quiet during Mother's Day activities." "Then maybe the choice isn't yours to make," Elena said gently. "She's 8 years old, Elena. 8-year-olds don't make decisions about life and death." "No, but they make decisions about love," Elena replied. "And this Victoria woman, whatever else she's done wrong, she loves Sophie. You can see it, right? It's not fake or manipulative or selfish. She genuinely loves her daughter." Marcus nodded reluctantly. Even in the hospital, weak and facing her own mortality, Victoria's first concern had been for Sophie's well-being. "So tell Sophie the truth," Elena continued. "Tell her that sometimes mothers have to make impossible choices and sometimes those choices turn out to be wrong. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. Give her the chance to decide for herself whether she wants to know her biological mother before it's too late." That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine the conversation he would have to have with his daughter. How do you explain to a child that her entire understanding of her family is about to change? How do you prepare her for love and loss happening at the same time? The next morning he made Sophie pancakes again, their traditional serious conversation breakfast, and sat down across from her at their small kitchen table. "Sophie," he said, cutting his pancakes into precise squares the way she always did, "I need to tell you something important about Victoria, about the woman we've been meeting in the park." Sophie looked up from her syrup patterns, immediately sensing the gravity in his voice. "Is she okay? She seemed tired last week." She's sick, sweetheart. Very sick, but that's not what I need to tell you." Marcus took a deep breath. "Sophie, Victoria isn't just someone who knew your mother. Victoria is your mother." The words hung in the kitchen air like smoke. Sophie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, syrup dripping back onto her plate. "What do you mean?" she asked in a small voice. "I mean that the woman who gave birth to you didn't die when you were a baby. Her name is Victoria Sterling, and she's been watching you grow up from far away because she thought that was what was best for you." Sophie set down her fork carefully, her 8-year-old mind processing information that would have been difficult for an adult to understand. "So my mom is alive?" she asked. "Yes." "And she's Victoria from the park?" "Yes. But why didn't she keep me? Why did she give me away?" This was the question Marcus had been dreading, the one that had no easy answers. because she was very young and very scared, and she thought I could take better care of you than she could. And sweetheart, she was right. I love you more than anything in the world, and I'm never going to stop being your dad. Nothing changes that." Sophie was quiet for a long time, staring at her pancakes as if they might contain the answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "Is she going to die?" she said finally. Marcus felt his throat close up. "Yes, sweetheart. She's very sick, and the doctors can't make her better. That's why she wanted to meet you. She wanted to know you before she can't anymore." "How long does she have?" The question was so adult, so matter-of-fact, that Marcus almost couldn't answer it. "Not very long, maybe a couple of months." Sophie nodded solemnly, processing this with the same serious concentration she brought to her violin practice. "So if I want to know her, I need to do it soon." "That's right." "And do you think she wants to know me too?" Marcus thought about Victoria's face in the park, the way she watched Sophie with desperate intensity, as if she were trying to memorize every expression and gesture. "More than anything," he said, "she's wanted to know you for your whole life." Sophie was quiet again, pushing pancake pieces around her plate in thoughtful patterns. "Can I ask her questions about why she gave me away and why she stayed away for so long?" "You can ask her anything you want," Marcus promised, "and you'll still be my dad no matter what." "Forever and always," Marcus said firmly. "Nothing will ever change that." Sophie nodded once, decision made with the clarity that only children possessed. "Then I want to know her. I want to know my mom." 3 hours later, Marcus and Sophie stood outside Victoria's penthouse building, both of them nervous for different reasons. Marcus had called ahead, and Victoria had given them permission to come up, but he could hear the fear in her voice even over the phone. The elevator ride to the top floor felt eternal. Sophie stood beside him in her best dress, the navy blue one with the white collar that she wore to violin recitals, clutching a drawing she'd made that morning. It was a picture of 3 stick figures standing under a tree, labeled "Me and Dad and Mom" in careful 8-year-old handwriting. When the elevator doors opened directly into Victoria's living room, she was waiting for them, dressed simply in black pants and a white blouse, her hands trembling visibly at her sides. "Hello, Sophie," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Hello, Mom?" Sophie said carefully, testing out the word like she was trying on new shoes. Victoria's face crumpled and she sank to her knees, so she was at Sophie's eye level. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you don't have to call me that if it doesn't feel right. You can call me Victoria or whatever feels comfortable to you." "But you are my mom," Sophie said with 8-year-old logic. "I mean, you're my birth mom. Dad explained it to me. You grew me in your tummy, but then you gave me to Dad to raise because you couldn't take care of me yet." "That's right," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "And giving you away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the best thing because look how wonderful you've become." Sophie stepped closer and held out her drawing. "I made this for you," she said. "It's our family." Victoria took the paper with trembling hands, studying the 3 stick figures with the intensity of someone viewing a masterpiece in a museum. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." For the next 2 hours, they sat together on Victoria's white leather sofa, while Sophie asked the questions she'd been storing up for 8 years. Why had Victoria given her away? Because she was too young and scared to be a good mother? Did Victoria ever think about her? Every single day. Did Victoria love her more than all the stars in the sky? Would Victoria have kept her if she'd known how to be a better mother? Yes, but then Sophie wouldn't have had Marcus as a father, and Marcus was the best father anyone could ask for. Victoria answered every question with honesty, tempered by age appropriateness, never making excuses for her choices, but also helping Sophie understand that sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions with no perfect answers. "I want to show you something," Victoria said finally, leading Sophie to a room that Marcus hadn't seen before, a bedroom that had been converted into a shrine to Sophie's childhood. The walls were covered with photographs. Sophie as a baby in Marcus's arms, Sophie taking her first steps, Sophie at every birthday party and school event and violin recital she'd ever had. Sophie stared in amazement. "You have pictures of my whole life," she breathed. "I have every picture," Victoria confirmed. "I've been watching you grow up, and I've been so proud of you. You're kind and smart and talented, and you have the best heart of anyone I've ever known." "But you missed everything," Sophie said, and there was sadness in her voice that made Marcus's chest ache. "You missed teaching me to ride a bike and helping me with homework and reading me bedtime stories." "I did," Victoria agreed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But Sophie, I also got to see you become the most incredible little girl, and I got to watch your dad love you with everything he has. I may have missed the day-to-day parts of being your mother, but I never missed seeing who you are." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, and when it was time to leave, Sophie hugged Victoria with the fierce intensity that she usually reserved for Marcus when he came home from work. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked. "If you want to," Victoria said. "If your dad says it's okay." "I want to see you every day until—" Sophie's voice trailed off as she processed what "until" meant. "Until I can't see you anymore," Victoria finished gently. "Would you like that?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I love you," she said, and the words were simple and matter-of-fact, and absolutely devastating. "I love you too, sweetheart," Victoria whispered. "I've loved you since before you were born." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of daily visits, afternoon adventures, and bedtime stories that Victoria finally got to read in person instead of imagining from photographs. Sophie divided her time between her regular life with Marcus and her new life with Victoria, somehow managing to love them both without feeling torn between them. Victoria grew weaker as November turned into December, but she also seemed more alive than Marcus had ever seen her. She taught Sophie to paint watercolors, showed her how to braid friendship bracelets, and told her stories about the business world that made Sophie laugh and ask if she could visit Victoria's office someday. Someday became a word they all learned to avoid. The end came on a Tuesday morning in mid-December. Marcus got the call at 6 a.m. Victoria had been rushed to the hospital during the night. By the time he and Sophie arrived, she was unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. Dr. Chen met them in the hallway. "It won't be long now," she said gently. "Hours, not days." Sophie, who had been unusually quiet during the drive to the hospital, looked up at Marcus with old eyes in her young face. "Can I say goodbye?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. They went into Victoria's room together, and Sophie climbed carefully onto the bed beside her mother, curling up against Victoria's side like she had every right to be there. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "It's me, Sophie. Dad and I are here." Victoria's eyelids fluttered and her hand moved slightly to rest on Sophie's head. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "What is she trying to say?" Sophie asked. Marcus leaned closer and could barely make out the words. "Love you. So proud. So sorry." "She says she loves you," Marcus told Sophie, "and she's proud of you." Sophie nodded and pressed her face against Victoria's shoulder. "I love you too, Mom. Thank you for finding me." Victoria Sterling died at 3:17 p.m. with her daughter in her arms and the man who had raised her daughter holding her hand. Her last breath was peaceful, and her face, for the first time since Marcus had known her, looked completely at rest. The funeral was small but beautiful. Victoria had left detailed instructions for a service that celebrated life rather than mourning death. Sophie read a poem she had written about mothers who love their children in different ways, and Marcus spoke about the courage it takes to let go of someone you love so they can have a better life. Elena cried through the entire service, and even Dr. Chen and Jennifer Walsh had tears streaming down their faces. But Sophie, who had cried plenty in private, stood strong and dry-eyed, holding Marcus's hand and saying goodbye to her mother with the same dignity Victoria had shown in her final weeks. After the service, Marcus and Sophie went home to their small apartment and made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner because it was Sophie's favorite and because normal life had to continue even when everything felt different. "Dad," Sophie said as they sat at their kitchen table, "I'm sad that Mom died, but I'm also happy that I got to know her." "Me too, sweetheart. And I'm glad she gave me to you," Sophie continued, "because you're still my real dad, right? Even though I found my real mom too?" Marcus pulled Sophie into his lap, this 8-year-old who had just buried her mother and was somehow still thinking about his feelings. "I'm your dad forever and always," he promised. "Nothing will ever change that." "Good," Sophie said, settling against his chest with the complete trust that only children possessed. "Because I love you the most." 6 months later, Marcus opened a letter from Victoria's lawyer that would change their lives one final time. Victoria Sterling had left her entire estate, worth nearly $2 billion, to Sophie Rivera, with Marcus as the trustee until Sophie turned 25. The letter explained Victoria's reasoning. "I couldn't give Sophie the first 8 years of her life, but I can give her every opportunity for the rest of it. This money is not to change who she is or how she was raised, but to ensure that she can pursue any dream, help anyone who needs it, and make whatever impact she wants to make on the world. Marcus has already given her the most important things: love, values, and the knowledge that she is worthy of both. The money is just a tool to help her use those gifts." Marcus stared at the letter for a long time, thinking about the woman who had spent her final weeks learning to be a mother, and her final act ensuring that her daughter would never want for anything. That evening he explained the inheritance to Sophie in terms she could understand. She listened with the same serious concentration she brought to everything important, then asked the question that proved Victoria had chosen the right father for her daughter. "Does this mean I can help other kids whose moms and dads can't take care of them?" "If that's what you want to do with it," Marcus said. Sophie nodded firmly. "That's what I want. Because everybody should have someone who loves them, like you love me." 3 years later, the Rivera Foundation, established with Victoria's money but run according to Sophie's 11-year-old sense of justice, had helped place over 300 children in loving homes. Marcus quit his construction jobs to run the foundation full-time, and Sophie spent her weekends visiting the children they'd helped, playing violin for them and teaching them to draw. The wall of Marcus's new office was covered with photos of their extended family, dozens of children who had found homes, dozens of families that had been created through love rather than biology. And in the center of it all was a photograph of Victoria Sterling holding Sophie on that last day in the hospital, both of them smiling despite everything they were about to lose. Sophie still missed her mother sometimes, still asked questions about her and wondered what she would think about school projects or violin recitals or the boy in her class who kept pulling her hair. But she had also learned something that would serve her well for the rest of her life. That love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, that families are built in all kinds of ways, and that sometimes the most profound act of love is knowing when to let go. Marcus had learned something too. He'd learned that courage isn't about running into burning cars, though that's part of it. Real courage is about opening your heart to complicated truths, messy emotions, and love that doesn't come with guarantees. It's about trusting that doing the right thing, even when it's painful, will eventually lead to something beautiful. And as he watched Sophie grow into a young woman who combined Victoria's fierce intelligence with his own steady compassion, Marcus knew that Victoria Sterling had been right about one thing. Love is always fair, even when it hurts, even when it ends too soon, because love, once given, never really dies. It just finds new ways to bloom. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.